Welcome to the Data Leadership Lessons Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony J. Algman. Data's everywhere in our businesses, and it takes leadership to make the most of it. We bring you the people, stories, and lessons to help you become a data leader. We've partnered with Dataversity to provide listeners with 20% off your first training center purchase with promo code ALGMANDL. Go to dataleadershiptraining.com to learn more. Today, on episode 67, we welcome Rob Dickinson. Rob's comfort zone is right at the intersection between people and technology. His technical and leadership skills were honed at Intel, Dell, and Quest Software, but his true passion is listening and learning from customers. After 15 years of experience in the APM market, Rob started Resurface with the goal of creating first-party observability solutions where customers truly own their data and where security and privacy controls are seamlessly integrated. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Anthony.
So what we normally do with first-time guests is we'll have you take a moment to tell the audience a bit more about your career before Resurface and how those experiences led you to doing what you do now. But before we do that, I want to know, what does APM mean? Because that is something that I didn't know the term for, and that is something that I think everybody might have on their mind right now. So let's cover that first, and then we'll get into the intro.
Gosh, so many acronyms, right? like APM and API and what are all these things, right? And then you go to Wikipedia and you see what the letters stand for, and it tells you absolutely nothing more than you knew already. So
That's right.
So APM is application performance management. And so that's a discipline of measuring performance and improving performance over time of your systems. And that's really what led us to doing what we're doing now with Resurface. A lot of the early problems that we saw with the early web were around the availability of those systems or the performance of those systems, kind of the general robustness. But what we've started to see more and more in recent years are cases where those systems are up and they're responding quickly, but they're doing absolutely the wrong thing. They're processing business transactions where the business is losing money. They're breaking. They're being exploited. They're being attacked. They're being probed. And so there's a lot more risk to running a web property than there used to be. And the other big shift is kind of the move from web first systems to API first systems. And what that really means, again, you can look up, what does API mean? It's application programming interface. But what we really mean is that we're moving from a web that was originally designed for people that were using web browsers to browse content and share pictures and stuff like that. We're moving from that entertainment vehicle designed for humans to the backbone of a digital society where the internet is how we work, it's how we shop, how we interact with each other. So much more than just an entertainment vehicle. And then our software is actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So it's not humans sitting at web browsers. It's all kinds of software and software systems interacting with each other over the internet. So it's amazing time to be in the business.
Yeah, well, and this is going to be a fun conversation because I think that the audience out there is typically going to have a little bit more knowledge than what the general population would around, some of our favorite acronyms, APIs. I will mention, I actually knew that one. And it's actually a thing that I talk about quite frequently. So I'm really interested in some of the topics that we'll get into today. But before we do that, let's now go back, let's rewind and understand what motivated you in your career to get to this place. Like, what is it that makes you tick, and what are you passionate about most?
Yeah, I mean, how I got into the kind of system monitoring, web monitoring, and now API monitoring and API security is really, I've always been in this industry. I mean, my background, I got started building websites during the original gold rush, right back in the late 90s, and it's hard to build these systems. It's hard to maintain these systems. It's hard to deliver. I've had the experiences of being up late at night trying to figure out why things aren't working, and all the positives and negatives associated with that. So, I feel those problems very personally. I mean, I'm a coder by trade. I'm a I'm an engineer by training, and so we just really wanted to help with those issues. These things are only getting more complicated over time. Our systems are only getting more complex and more interdependent, more linked on each other. And just so even understanding what's the right behavior of this system. And then I know we've all had those cases where things just don't work right. Mm-hmm. You have things that are failing, you have things that aren't going through. A lot of times there may not be anyone to call. And so one of the things that we like to talk about is, in the physical world, for example, there's a receipt to go with every transaction. There's usually records. There's usually, especially if in a business context, right? And really the web and the API economy are just kind of starting to catch up to those ideas. We just don't assume that when something breaks on the internet that there's actually someone there to hear it. Mm-hmm. Quite frequently there isn't. And I think it's, some folks expect that there's actually more monitoring that there actually is sometimes. But a lot of the folks that we talk to, they're honestly doing their best to keep these systems running, but it's very much a moving target.
Well, and the complexity is not getting less. It is only increasing. And things that you think, like, it's easy to take for granted when things work. And sometimes I just think, so there was a podcast, we won't name which one, but there was a podcast that had switched where its address was going, and everything on initial views looked like it had transferred perfectly well. 3 weeks go by, and the listeners of that podcast seem to have dropped off precipitously, even though the content, I don't think, or I mean, the host didn't think, it had gotten much worse. But the fact was that something had happened. Well, what it turned out to be is that the podcast aggregators did manage the change correctly for the first 72 hours. And then once all of the caching got resolved on the back end and everything got redirected, everything broke. And it was not apparent until the actual downloads were revealed to not be working correctly. And some person's like, yeah, why aren't you releasing any new episodes? That's when that problem got fixed. But until it became awareness, there was nothing that would have indicated that there was a problem. And that's just, somebody with a podcast. Like, there's so much complexity happening, and the dependencies are not always well understood. And so the only, and I'm going to just put my own words here, that the way to solve for this are what I call highly aligned, loosely coupled architectures, of which APIs play a very significant role, because you have this notion, and for the folks out there that are not super familiar with APIs, you have this kind of publish and subscribe type of model where an API exists to be able to provide information on request to whatever entity is calling for it, and it gets verified, and the security and all of that stuff gets handled. But not unlike this podcast, if you're downloading this through, say, your iTunes podcast, music, whatever it is, or Google Play, or whatever the different applications are, it probably just works for you. Well, what happens is I'm uploading the show to one place, and a whole bunch of places out there know about that location, send catalog type information to a bunch of recipients that say, hey, I want to listen to this podcast. Then everything on the back end is happening through APIs to then deliver that file, that audio file, to you in your podcast application of choice. But it is hosted in one place. And theoretically, if I move that, I should be able to redirect all of those pointers, and nothing should have any problems at all. Doesn't always work like that in reality, but that is a absolute low 100 level introductory course of what an API is from Anthony's perspective. Although, Rob, you're probably like, oh, that was the worst description I have literally ever heard. So
no, that's right on. I mean, because really APIs are all about software agents. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, they're about kinds of software that we're enabling to do work on our behalf. And it's much more sophisticated work than just rendering a web page or playing a video. those interactions are getting a lot more complex, a lot more nuanced, starting to get a lot closer to real, actual human interactions, right? And that level of nuance and complexity. The other thing you touched on there is the system complexity, the kind of data conditions, all those things that feed into those systems. It's a huge number of variables to parse, right? And as computer scientists, I mean, we've known for a long time that most of the software we rely on is not provably correct. Right? The math is way too hard. The number of possible combinations is way too vast to ever prove that things are actually working properly. And then we're changing the stuff and improving the stuff and evolving it at a mile a minute. So so nothing stays still for very long. There's tremendous benefit and creativity that comes with that constant disruption that we're going through here. So I think we're on the right side of history with our enthusiasm towards that. But it's hard to keep up with for sure.
Yeah, and I think about, the challenge of having something that is loosely coupled, because there are things like, how do you test for that? How do you make sure that you're running through the scenarios that are likely to occur out in the wild and having the right results? And there's complexity that becomes obfuscated because the interface is actually extremely easy to work with. An API is wonderful because it's basically, we all think about like putting square pegs in round holes. If you ever remember like the children's workshop where they're got their hammers and their screwdrivers and stuff, and there was a shape, and that shape would literally only fit into one of the holes, and they engineered it so precisely so you couldn't just cram that square peg into the round hole. And that's what APIs are now, is that it makes it so easy to connect into this total black box that's out there, but you can get exactly the information that you ask for. Now you hope that black box knew what it was doing, because whatever's happening on the other side of that connection point, you're not going to have the same level of depth of insight into as if you had just kind of created it all yourself, or if you had done some of the earlier integration models where you're actually merging in code libraries and you're doing all the stuff where you can see behind the covers. But the benefit is in that simplicity of that connection point where you can say, okay, I'm going to trust that this has what it needs to have. But if it doesn't, then big problems can occur. And I think we've seen, and I don't know that it's a fair thing to go and call it like an API oriented problem like the Log4j issue, where we're trusting an entity, is my point, because I don't want to get bogged down to the technical details, but we're trusting an entity to a point to do something for us that should be reliable and should be safe. And when that turns out not to be, I would imagine 80 to 90% of the listeners out there have heard of the Log4j problem. I would imagine half of them have no idea what that actually was or means, and that's okay. But the awareness that we had something so pervasive that so many of us had to contend with, I think is evidence that when this stuff goes sideways, it goes sideways. It can go sideways in a big way, in a bad way. Given all that, because I'm bouncing all over the place, I want to learn more about Resurface and what role you guys play in all of this ecosystem, because it's so big. You can't be doing everything for everybody. What is it that you guys focus on?
Right. So what the issues that you just alluded to there around complexity, quality, and also loss of control, it's true from the API provider side as well. As an API provider, I'm giving up that concept of a genuine client. I'm giving up that level of control over the client. So what you really need in that context then is more telemetry and more understanding about how your APIs are actually being used. And that's where a tool like Resurface will come in. So one analogy that we use is Resurface is kind of like a weblog on steroids. Like if you know what a weblog is, like your Apache weblog, it would give you a list of here's all the requests that were made. We're giving you a system of record for this is what all the inputs to your APIs were, and this is all the outputs. So these are the requests, these are the responses. We can then take that raw data and roll that up to more session level views or more application level views. But at the end of the day, that's really what we're all about. Is you can think of us kind of like as a security camera or a surveillance camera for your APIs. And the intent of that is to establish a record of the transaction, so that if you're conducting transactions through your APIs, that you can actually go back and see, well, did those complete the way that we expected? Where were the things that broke? And what's increasingly important is, how are those APIs being misused? How are they being attacked? And how are they actually being violated? And managing the damage around that.
I see. So do you have a kind of target market? Is this something that you are doing for small and mid-sized businesses or any size organization, or who is it that will buy what Resurface has to offer?
So this is such a fun thing to talk about, because this is actually my second company in the space. And our first company, we were really an enterprise play. We were working with some very, very large accounts that had very, very large budgets. And for example, when you're talking to Bank of America, like those transactions are being recorded and being audited. But they have bazillions of dollars to spend doing that. And there's, that's not true of everyone. And there's also not enough of that big data talent to go around. And there really aren't enough turnkey solutions, especially solutions that are really built with an API economy in mind. And so our goal is really to democratize this technology, so that every API provider, whether they're big or small, has the opportunity to get their hands around what's actually going on.
That makes sense. Is it exclusive to like public facing APIs, or I assume it would work for business to business or business to consumer types of APIs, or website driven types of things, or is it more nuanced than that? I don't know if I'm understanding enough.
It's, one obvious application is if you're processing financial transactions, if you're dealing with healthcare records, you're dealing with sensitive user data, you're actually running business transactions over the web. Gosh, you better have a receipt of what's actually going on, right? Yeah. And we're certainly seeing, a lot more regulations that are specifically requiring that, right? And specifically requiring access to certain kind of data be through APIs. Look at some of the recent work that the Biden administration's done in this area. I think that's right on. I think it's right on to say, just having human readable information on a website, squirreled away in a PDF somewhere, really isn't good enough. It needs to be programmatically accessible. So I hear the question there, and I'm not trying to dodge. Like, what's the specific niche that we're going after? That's kind of the fun of what we're doing right now. Is right now everybody wants to be an API provider. So it's a very large section of the market to be looking at.
No, I think that's a totally fair response. It did get me thinking about those, and I think it's only been like the last year or two where now whenever you go to a website, it talks about cookies and like we have your data or whatever, and you have to hit accept. I think somebody has read one of those at some point, but I have it has something to do with data privacy, and you're granting access and to being able to use that information. But it just feels like, to your point around like some language buried somewhere about things that an organization is doing with data or with the technology. And it feels to me like even though I know we're in a very litigious society and we have to have all of our legalese and contract language and all of that in place, I think more businesses would like to be just good citizens of that data stewardship, and making sure that at the end of the day we'll dot our I's and cross our T's. We have to, as businesses. We're used to that, whether it's taxes or regulation, licenses, whatever. But beyond just having those words on the page somewhere that nobody is ever going to read, it's about doing the right thing by our customers and our clients. Like that to me is what drives more entrepreneurs and more businesses, is to say, we want to make sure that we're actually protecting this data and doing the right things, because our customers have chosen to work with us, have chosen to give us business. And the least we can do is not subject them to, data privacy concerns on top of everything. And I think with, the electronic medical records, health information, financial information, it's all very serious stuff. And it seems like no end to all of that. So I think that having that kind of protection with an API that is a more robust one than you might be able to come up with otherwise, that seems to add a lot of value for organizations out there, big and small. I mean, it's not, every organization does not need to go and try to figure out all of these things on their own. And they're not going to have the talent. The talent doesn't exist for every company out there to hire someone who understands all of this stuff. It's really, really complicated things.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things to understand as a data leader today are the implications between first party data and third party data. That's where the legislation is really starting to bear its teeth, right? And actually, that's one of the things that I like about the legislation that we have, is that there are very clear standards of care now on kind of both sides of that. And it's not just PCI, right? It's not just how we're going to handle data in-house, but where is that data going out of house? And when you think about that, what would the analogy to that be in the physical world? It's ridiculous, right? I mean, if I go down the street to buy a pack of gum at the corner store, and the guy behind the counter isn't going to say, "Hey, would you like a copy of this transaction to go to Google?" I would say, hell no. Why would I? How did Google get into the conversation all of a sudden? I'm doing business with you. I'm standing across the counter from you. So exactly to your point, a lot of the slippery slope there, I think, comes into sharing data with third parties, where the sharing of that data does not directly benefit the consumer. It's a way of remonetizing their data. And hey, I understand if I'm using a free service, I understand my data may be monetized because I'm not paying for it. But if I'm conducting real business, that should be with the people that I'm actually doing business with. And that's one thing that I really love about what we're doing with Resurface, is we're not another third party to add to that. We're not trying to just replace Google in the surveillance economy. We're trying to rewire the surveillance economy to say that you need that observability, you need that record keeping, but as a first party, you should own that record keeping, and that data should be yours. Like, if there's any data that you really should keep and own 100%, it's how you're interacting with your actual customers. That's gold.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that, because I think about organizations out there, and we talk, this is data leadership lessons. We go in a lot of different directions on this show. And, there's some topics that people love to learn about, things like artificial intelligence. And I know some people are still using the term big data and all of these things. But when I think about what is the most important information to any business out there, it's going to be, who are your customers and what are your transactions? What are the actual fundamental building blocks of your business? 100 times over, that's more important than what kind of crazy algorithm you can run on generalized data that gives you some sort of, machine learning, deep learning, insight. That stuff is the stuff you do after you've mastered transactional reporting, after you make sure that your data is stored correctly, that it is protected, and that you are not inadvertently giving away your customer information to a bunch of third-party organizations. And so I think that addressing that actively is incumbent upon any business leader to make sure, hey, do we really know not just where our data is for our purposes, but how it's protected and managed through the chain of custody from the time it gets created because a customer chose to give us some business, to when we fulfilled their order and completed that relationship and hopefully built towards future business dealings with them. how do we know that that's been, protected end to end? Because I think that a lot of folks out there never really think about it in those terms. They think about the different stages of the business execution, but they don't necessarily think about how is that from a data perspective. We all talk about data assets, but this can be the liability side of that, saying, okay, what responsibilities do we have from this data that's been created by the work that we've done with customers who trust us?
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of that it falls to the ethical leadership of those data leaders, right? Because the 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 nasty part about that is that the cheap way is to give all your data away, right? Those data providers, they're more than happy to take that data and remonetize it, and they'll make it easy for you to do that. And to a certain extent, that has become the standard of care that we've come to expect, right? We expect that Google Analytics is running everywhere. And it's not that that's going away over time, or it's not that that's going away immediately, but certainly over time, there's going to be a bit of a reset there around, what is the data about me that really should be shared with all these third parties without my consent, without my knowledge, and is that really something that we want to double down on? I mean, I think we can do a little better, personally.
Yeah.
It's good for the power structure. It's good for Google. It's good for Amazon. Is it good for their consumers? I don't know. I tend to think it's not the greatest.
You kind of feel like any business that's predicated upon the customer not really understanding what's going on, there's some shady things happening there. Like that it's not always where the customer would say, yes, I'm 100% on board with that. There's a reason you're obfuscating some of that information, is that if the customer fully understood it, they probably wouldn't go for it. So yeah.
The other thing that's paramount to think about as a data leader in this context is those data sets have lifetimes of their own. And those lifetimes oftentimes will even exceed the life of your business, right? So it's not just where does that data live, who has it, but who is going to own it in the future? Who's gonna have access to that in the future? Where is that going to roll up to? These things are not static. These data sets live a lot longer than they were really intended to in a lot of cases. And in the context of storage getting a lot cheaper, cloud storage being something that's available as a commodity, those kinds of issues are only going to get worse as we go forward.
Yeah, it's really clear that data is very long lived. I think that's a fair statement. Let's shift gears a little bit into understanding what do we do? Because I think this is a pattern that we have followed before in other episodes of this show, where we get into some of the details and it seems pretty bad. Like there's a lot of doom and gloom out there. The sky is falling. I often reflect back on like one of my favorite quotes, and that is, an expert is somebody who knows enough to be scared. And I find that often follows in our episodes. But I want to think about so what's actionable for people out there? Like, how do you take because I think most of our organization, we have something going on with APIs already, but we probably will if we don't. How do you assess how much risk we're at? Because I feel like there's probably some business leaders out there that are like, ooh, we might be doing a lot of this stuff. How do you assess that security of your APIs, or how do you understand or manage the data privacy concerns that are incumbent with these APIs? Like, where do you even start?
I think there is an easy way to start. It's maybe not the sexiest strategy ever, but I think in a lot of aspects in business, the way that you move the needle is you establish KPIs, you establish things that are measurable. Of course, we can argue those definitions and their fairness and all that kind of stuff, but when you put things on a more empirical frame like that, and you're starting to develop what are those metrics, what are those signals, what are those things that you really can measure and rely upon, and then are those signals going in the right direction over time? I mean, whether you're fighting quality problems or security issues or whatever, or you're just trying to pivot in a new direction. I think a lot of times that's the process that we want to follow. And I think when you get people with beers in their hands talking at conferences about these kinds of things, the worst case scenario is you honestly don't know what's going on. Your visibility is limited, so you're falling back to guessing. You're overlaying your worst fears, what happened in previous companies, what you think might happen, all these things that are completely different to process emotionally, and tactically and strategically when you don't have the hard data in front of you. I've heard stories about political campaigns, for example. They come in and this was a story from the Obama campaign originally, his first time through. They were having all kinds of problems on their website, and they brought in some really smart folks from Google to look at this. And their first recommendation was, dude, there's no response time monitoring. How do we know if the site is slow or not? Like, if we're not keeping that metric, how do we know if it's good enough? And how do we know if we're moving the needle when it comes to actually making that better? So, I think all these things boil down to, putting things on that more empirical frame, having the data about the data sometimes that you need. But to really change things, you're going to have to up level that to something that the rest of your organization can understand. And that's something that's really important also as a data leader, is to be translating what you know about the technical domains into things that are more understandable and actionable for the business. And I think the more that you can kind of meet your business folks midway in doing that, and have that common language around your key performance indicators and how you're tracking them, that's going to be, I think, a very simple recipe to get your head around. That if you practice that, obviously there's more sophisticated things that you can do than just that. But if you're not doing that, you really are missing a large part of the problem that you should be solving for.
Yeah, that advice works in a lot of different contexts. It's if you don't know where you are, start looking around, start drawing that map around you before you try to figure out which direction to head. Gather situational awareness, gather information, and realize where you're flying blind. If you're flying blind, turning isn't going to help. I mean, at least where you're going right now, you haven't hit the ground yet, or you haven't run into the mountain yet. At least hold on, give it another minute while you try to figure out how do we get some readings into what we're doing here so that we can have some measures, so that we can react to them, so we can see if we're on the path towards improvement or not. And so baselining before you do anything different, baseline so you can see whether or not the impacts of what you've done are good or bad. I'm scared now, so because we've talked a little bit about like some basic things that you can do, and I'm scared about this whole world of device and APIs and in this Internet of Things universe. A few weeks ago, we had a person on who was talking about the smart light bulbs that he has in his house, and they can change colors and they can go on or off based on an app on the phone. And I know in the back of my mind, another conversation I had years ago with an ethical hacker security friend of mine who talked about, he's like, people aren't often paying for the level of baseline security that you would normally want to have because there's not enough perceived value in it right now. And that's where, like, in the infancy of Internet of Things, you're pricing things to the lowest cost possible. Why would you put in a bunch of controls that people don't understand, encryption standards or what have you, to avoid attacks? So now I'm curious, because we've gotten a few years later and my buddy got me thinking about these light bulbs. Are we, with the advent of Internet of Things, going to have an absolute explosion of vulnerabilities? And can our APIs help protect us from that? Or are we just going to be subject to the lack of likely security and safety embedded in these Internet of Things devices?
Yeah, what scares me when I when I think about this stuff late at night when I'm trying to sleep is a lot of the folks that I talk to, there's not maybe the general sense that we're winning the cybersecurity wars online right now. I mean, we're operating in an environment now where the instant that an endpoint is accessible from a public internet, it is going to be probed, continuously for the whole time it's available. A lot of the folks that we talk to, bot traffic and malicious traffic is now actually a majority of their traffic. It's not the odd case, right? So and there's a huge social component to that. I mean, when I first started building websites, it was almost like a badge of honor if you got hacked. It was like, oh, well, somebody must really be into what we're doing and paying attention. Like, look how cool we are that people want to get in and doing that. I
Yeah.
mean, now it's just it's constant. What would your bank look like if half the people that walked in through the front door of the bank were there to rob the place?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to operate your bank very differently. Um, at the end of the day, though, I'm an optimist when it comes to technology. I think this technology does create problems, but I think it solves more problems and delivers more benefit. I think the balance does end up being kind of on the right side there in the end. But we have a lot of work to do. The cybersecurity attackers are increasingly sophisticated, increasingly well funded. They're increasingly creative and organized. Right? They run their business as a business. They take what they're doing extremely seriously, just like we do. So it's new normal, and IoT, it just gives you more places to run code, and anything that runs code is an opportunity to exploit. I mean, what happens when I'm fleeing a bank after the bank robbery, and I can remotely disable the engines in the police cars that are chasing me? I mean, that sounds like something that's like should be in the next Steven Soderbergh movie, but that kind of thing is not very far away from where we are right now.
Yeah, I think of a few years ago. This is definitely a few years ago now. I had in a talk I gave where a casino actually got hacked through a smart fish tank feeding system. And you're like, you would think that the casinos would be better protectors of what's going on. And it was an interesting case, but I also think about, to your point, around the fact that we're under constant attack now, that there's something to be said for the fact that you're building muscle memory, that you have to have these protections and you have to manage to these, what could be, previously a smart fish tank feeding system sounds ridiculous. Well, if that is the vulnerability, we've got to protect for a lot of stuff, and we've got to have layers of that protection all throughout to try to catch any of the kinds of things that are under constant attack. So because we're under constant attack, it actually gives me some measure of confidence that we're building in the right kinds of protections. Otherwise, our businesses are going to go badly in every direction if we can't protect for some of these things. So maybe the device never gets built the hardware to protect it because of cost considerations or what have you, but the surrounding software architecture, it becomes smart enough to manage that and keep those kinds of intrusions from taking hold and causing bigger problems. So maybe there is hope, and it's not my problem personally to solve. I think you're in the fight on this one, certainly more than I am personally. But I think that evolution of, I mean, that story of the cat and mouse, right? Like, it's so many different areas in technology. We're trying to do good and innovative things, and then we say, oh, this was cool. There's a whole bunch of ways to compromise businesses using this cool and interesting thing. Now we've got to harden it, and we've got to make it more enterprise grade, and make it so that these businesses can rely upon it versus being problematic. But clearly, there's days where it feels like we're not winning that battle. You think about all the malicious software out there, you think about the ransomware attacks, you think about the things that have broken through that system, and certainly it is a fight that continues on. But I think that with what you're doing, what you're offering with Resurface is something that a lot of organizations could never hope to build on their own and do so successfully, given all these considerations.
It certainly is a lot of ground to cover. It pulls a lot of things together to be able to do this. I'm really excited about that mission because I truly do believe that when technologists have better ways to understand how things are breaking, how things are being used, how things are being exploited, that's what gives us the opportunity to inoculate those systems and really build stronger and more resilient systems all the time. One of my favorite quotes about security that I stole from one of my buddies is so many security issues are really failures of imagination, just like the fish tank thing, right? You just didn't imagine the fish tank being used that way, but now you know, and now you can guard against it. And so it's just like with establishing those KPIs, being in the business of doing that inoculation and helping move the needle towards those positive outcomes. That's what keeps us going every day, and why we're just so excited and blessed to be on this journey.
Yeah, well, we're lucky that you and others out there are taking this up and are passionate about this, because it is a difficult topic for a lot of folks that have other passions and a lot of other primary concerns that these, you can provide the service to give them that peace of mind that they need. So before we go, I want to ask you, can we, even though today's challenges are pretty big to begin with, can we look around the corner? Where does this all go? Where does this head? Do you see anything? Is APIs where we're at? Or are there other kinds of things that you envision on the horizon, or where do we go from here? What should we start thinking about in terms of what we might see in upcoming years in this space?
Wow, that's such such an expansive question. I think what I would say is, I think we're going to see humans being more in the passenger seat than in the driver's seat, in more than just our self-driving cars, right? But in terms of how we're managing our businesses, managing our finances, managing our people, managing all the assets that we have around us. The human operator is going to pull more and more back to the role of observer and auditor and philosopher and ethicist. Is this the right outcome? Is this what we wanted to happen? That's always going to be the things that the machines aren't going to be able to understand, right? But I think APIs, it's just one stepping stone towards humans being more in the passenger seat, and for us to have more help and more different kinds of assistance to that. Without APIs, what's your AI supposed to do? I mean, what are those AIs supposed to do? Talk to each other? I mean, it's that's going to be how those autonomous systems interact with systems in the physical world. So I'm really excited about all the possibilities there. And I think, for as much as there can be doom and gloom around cybersecurity at times, and there are real things at stake there. As I said before, I think in the long term, these things will end up being positive, and we'll have the right kinds of immune systems that help defend against these kinds of things. But I'm excited about what our new software overlords will help us do, and better help us manage the planet.
Yeah, well, I think it's the first step is to realizing that, hey, this stuff is there, it's being addressed. People are building some key software and service organizations to help those of us that are less equipped to deal with them ourselves to deal with them. And there is hope and help on the horizon, and that's where I think that what you're doing with your organization and how we as business leaders and data leaders out there can connect into it and capitalize on the good work of others. I mean, I think this is one of many places where there's now offerings that we can tap into in a reasonable way, whereas 10 years ago this could be a much more difficult scenario to consider. So I think that what you're doing and how you've entered the space and the services that you're offering are tremendously helpful and give us hope. I mean, I can tell the hope in your voice and how you think about these things. And that I think is something that we can all latch onto and feel a little bit more confident that, hey, this is a battle that we can win and that our businesses can be protected.
And it's democratizing. I think in a really positive way. It has the opportunity to kind of level the playing field a bit. I mean, if you think about, if I wanted to, and I'll just pick someone out of the hat, but like if I wanted to work with Wells Fargo as an outside agency 10 years ago, I probably would have had to sign up for some partner program. I would have to have my all kinds of checks and all kinds of things, like to get access to their systems, right? That was a heavily gated, very expensive process, and consequently only available to a relatively small number of people. But as soon as someone like Wells Fargo has a public API, well, as a mom and pop shop, I can call that. Anyone can use it. I think just that on its own is pretty amazing in terms of really taking this technology and using it everywhere that it can be applied. That's the kind of future that I'm super excited about.
Yeah, I think you're right on, and I'm excited about that as well. So we are all out of time. So Rob, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your wisdom with all of us.
Thanks for having me. Great conversation.
And thank you all for joining us today. As always, you'll find more information about our guests and links in the show notes. Go to dataleadershiplessons.com to subscribe and check out past episodes and accelerate your journey with training at dataleadershiptraining.com. Stay safe during these unusual times and go make an impact.